The knock came during Sunday dinner, hard enough to silence the silver forks against the porcelain plates, hard enough to make the crystal chandelier above the dining room tremble almost imperceptibly in the cold Virginia rain. Colonel James Whitaker stood at the far end of his son's polished mahogany table, still wearing the Navy overcoat he had left Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in that same afternoon. His right hand wrapped around a dark wooden cane, his left hand resting on the back of an empty chair as if the room itself had tilted beneath him. Outside the tall windows of the McLean mansion, wet leaves clung to the black driveway, and two small American flags near the stone walkway snapped in the wind under white security lights. Inside, everything looked expensive and dead. Prime rib cooling under rosemary butter, a $260 bottle of Napa Cabernet breathing untouched, gold-rimmed plates arranged with military precision by a housekeeper who had already disappeared. Into the kitchen. James had come expecting awkward welcome-home politeness after 6 weeks in a military hospital. Maybe a dry hug from his eldest son, maybe a forced toast about recovery. Instead, he had just learned that the house in Alexandria, the red brick home where he had raised 3 children, buried a wife's laughter in every hallway, and kept 30 years of service medals in a cedar chest, had been sold while he lay unconscious after a cardiac episode. His daughter Madison had said it, with a realtor's calm voice, almost bored. "Dad, you didn't need that house anymore. We did what was practical." For a moment, James did not blink. The old colonel who had briefed generals, crossed desert roads under fire, and stood beside flag-draped coffins seemed smaller in the yellow dining room light, his blue eyes fixed on the faces of his adult children, as if he were trying to identify strangers wearing familiar skin. If you're watching this story tonight, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, because some stories remind us that home is not just a place on a deed. It is the last piece of dignity a family should never steal. Gregory Whitaker, 44, corporate attorney, perfect haircut, perfect cufflinks, perfect dead expression, set his wine glass down and leaned back as if the matter had already been settled by people smarter than the old man standing before him. "Dad, don't make this dramatic," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. Across the table. "You were in the hospital. The doctors didn't know how long you'd be there. The property taxes were ridiculous. Maintenance was a nightmare. And honestly, that old place was becoming a liability." Across from him, Madison smoothed the sleeve of her cream designer blouse and avoided looking at the small gold wedding band still on her father's finger, the band he had never removed since Margaret died 6 years earlier. Tyler, the youngest, kept his eyes on his phone until James slowly turned toward him. The room smelled of roasted meat, expensive cologne, lemon furniture polish, and rain-soaked wool from James's coat. His grandchildren sat stiffly along the side of the table, old enough to feel the cruelty, but too young to challenge it, except for 13-year-old Emily, Gregory's daughter, who sat halfway in shadow near the staircase, both hands wrapped around a blue school folder pressed to her chest. James swallowed, and the motion seemed painful. He had not come to ask for money. He had not come to accuse. He had only come from the hospital to retrieve his house key, his clothes, his wife's letters, and the quiet bedroom where he still said goodnight to Margaret's photograph. "You sold my home," he said, each word slow, controlled, almost too calm, "while I was fighting to stay alive in a military hospital." Madison sighed as if correcting an elderly client. It was still in the family's best interest. James's hand tightened on the chair until his knuckles turned pale. "No," he whispered. "It was in yours." No one answered right away, and that silence did more damage than shouting could have done. The great dining room, with its abstract paintings and heated marble floors, seemed suddenly colder than the rain outside. James looked from one child to another and saw, in flashes, Gregory at 7 saluting him in oversized pajamas, Madison at 9 crying into his uniform before a deployment, Tyler at 12 begging him to come home for a cow. Little League championship he had missed because a convoy needed him more. He remembered mailing birthday cards from Kuwait, calling from bad satellite phones, promising Margaret that all the sacrifice would give the children a better life. And now those children sat in a mansion built partly from his money, beneath a framed photograph of him in dress uniform receiving a silver star. explaining that stealing his home had simply been practical. "Where are Margaret's letters?" he asked. Madison finally looked up. "Some things were put in storage." "Which storage?" James asked. Tyler muttered, "Dad, don't start." The colonel's jaw trembled once, barely visible, but Emily saw it. Her face crumpled. She pushed back her chair, the legs scraping loudly over the marble, and Gregory snapped, "Emily, sit down!" But the girl did not sit. She clutched the blue folder harder, her eyes shiny, her breathing uneven. "Grandpa," she said, voice breaking, "I tried to tell them it was wrong." Gregory's head turned so fast his chair creaked. "Emily." The warning in his voice was unmistakable. James lifted one hand, not as an officer giving command, but as a grandfather shielding the only honest person in the room. "Let her speak." Emily's lower lip shook. "They said you wouldn't remember. They said the hospital papers would make it easy. I heard Dad and Uncle Tyler talking in the office." The color drained from Gregory's face, and Madison whispered, "Oh my God." Then came the second knock, louder than the first, followed by the low chime of the security system and the blurred glow of headlights sweeping across the rain-streaked windows. No one moved. Gregory's wife, Lauren, appeared near the kitchen doorway with one hand pressed to her throat. Tyler stood abruptly, knocking his napkin to the floor. James did not step away from the table. He only turned his head toward the entrance hall, where the housekeeper's frightened voice carried through the open space. "Mr. Whitaker, there are people here?" A moment later, 2 federal agents entered the dining room in dark raincoats, their shoes wet against the marble, badges open at chest level. Behind them stood a woman in a charcoal suit, her hair pinned back, a Department of Veterans Affairs office of Inspector General credential hanging from her hand. The room that had treated James like a burden now froze, as if the American flag itself had walked in to witness what they had done. The taller agent looked first at Gregory, then at Madison, then at Tyler, and finally at the old colonel leaning on his cane. His voice was professional, but not unkind. "Colonel James Whitaker?" James straightened, pain flickering across his face as old instinct pulled his spine upright. "Yes." The agent took one step closer. "Sir, we're here regarding the fraudulent sale of your Alexandria residence and suspected financial exploitation during your hospitalization at Walter Reed." Emily let out a small sob. Gregory said, "This is a misunderstanding." But the VA investigator's eyes had already dropped to the blue folder in Emily's arms. James looked at his granddaughter, at the child shaking in the middle of a mansion full of adults, and understood that the war he had come home to fight was not overseas, not political, not military. It was at his own dinner table. James Whitaker had spent most of his life believing that fear could be managed if a man named it, measured it, and kept moving anyway. In Kandahar, fear had smelled like diesel, dust, sweat, and overheated metal. In Baghdad, it had sounded like rotor blades and distant shouting through a cracked radio. At Arlington National Cemetery, it had felt like folded flags pressed into the hands of mothers who already knew no speech would bring their sons home. But in Gregory's dining room, fear had no battlefield shape. It wore Italian cufflinks, a cream silk blouse, a son's familiar jawline, and a daughter's careful smile. James watched the federal agents move through the room with controlled efficiency, while his own children sat rigid, suddenly stripped of their polished confidence. The old colonel should have felt vindication, but what rose in his chest was something heavier and more humiliating. He remembered the first time he held Gregory in a military hospital in Texas, a red-faced newborn wrapped in a thin blanket, while Margaret laughed and said, "He has your serious eyes." He remembered telling that child that Whitakers did not lie, did not take what was not theirs, did not abandon family when things became inconvenient. Now, Gregory's face was pale with calculation, not remorse, and James felt the private collapse of every lesson he thought he had given. Special Agent Daniel Price, a square-shouldered man in his late 30s, with rain still beading on his black coat, asked everyone to remain seated, while the VA investigator, Marlene Ortiz, requested permission to speak privately with James. Gregory immediately objected, using his courtroom voice. "My father is recovering from a major medical event. He shouldn't be questioned without counsel." James turned slowly toward him. I spent 31 years answering questions under pressure, son. The word son landed without warmth. I can answer this one. Marlene's expression softened, though her posture remained official. She asked whether James had signed a power of attorney authorizing the sale of 1183 Cameron Street in Alexandria. James looked at the rain moving like thin gray lines down the window glass and said no. She asked whether he had approved the transfer of proceeds into a family management account. He said no, again. She asked if he had been conscious on October 14th at 9:42 a.m., the timestamp listed on a notarized digital authorization. James almost laughed, but the sound died before it reached his throat. On October 14th at 9:42 a.m., he said, I was on a ventilator at Walter Reed with a Navy nurse telling my granddaughter outside the room that I might not make it through the night. Emily covered her mouth. For the first time, Madison looked truly afraid. Before the betrayal, James had lived alone in the Alexandria house with routines so precise they bordered on prayer. He woke at 5:30 every morning, even after retirement, made black coffee in the same chipped Navy mug Margaret had bought him at a commissary in Norfolk, raised the American flag on the porch if the weather allowed, and read the Wall Street Journal at the kitchen table, beneath a framed photograph of Margaret laughing in a yellow raincoat. The house was not grand compared with the glass mansions of McLean, but it had dignity. Red brick, white trim, old oak floors that creaked near the stairs, a basement that smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil, a backyard where Margaret had planted hydrangeas that came back every spring like a promise. His medals were kept in a cedar chest because he hated displaying them, but Margaret's letters were kept in the top drawer of his nightstand, tied with blue ribbon. There were 184 of them, written across deployments, training rotations, long separations, and ordinary weeks when she wrote just to remind him there was still a home waiting. After she died from pancreatic cancer, James stopped sleeping on her side of the bed but never stopped leaving space for her. He was wealthy enough to buy a penthouse, a ranch, a beach house in Hilton Head, but he stayed on Cameron Street because love had soaked into the walls. His children had never understood that. To Gregory, the house was an underperforming asset in a desirable zip code. To Madison, it was a listing opportunity with historic charm and excellent walkability. To Tyler, it was trapped equity that could solve his private business problems if moved quickly enough. James had paid for Gregory's law degree at Georgetown, Madison's first condo after her divorce, and Tyler's failed software startup in Austin. He had written checks without complaint because that was how he knew to love. Provision, protection, problem-solving. Margaret had warned him before she died, her hand thin in his, that money without presence could turn children into clients. Don't just rescue them, Jim, she had whispered. Know them. He had promised her he would try, but grief made him quieter, not closer. After the funeral, the children visited less often. Birthdays became gift cards, Thanksgiving became rotating excuses, and phone calls turned into questions about taxes, trusts, and medical directives. James told himself they were busy, that this was modern family life, that independence was a good thing. He did not admit how often he ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter, because sitting alone at a table built for 5 felt like surrender. Emily had been the exception. She appeared in his life first as a shy 8-year-old, hiding behind Gregory's leg at a Veterans Day ceremony in Arlington, staring at the old men in uniform with solemn fascination. When James knelt, despite the pain in his knees, and handed her a small American flag keychain, she asked whether soldiers were scared. He had told her the truth. Every brave person is scared. They just don't let fear make the decision. From then on, she attached herself to him in quiet ways. She sent handwritten cards on Memorial Day because she thought it was a holiday for all soldiers, not only the fallen. She asked him to explain the difference between duty and obedience. She sat with him on the Alexandria porch, drinking lemonade while he told her carefully edited stories of service, leaving out the blood and keeping the lessons. Emily's own house was full of noise, but not attention. Gregory answered emails during dinner. Lauren corrected Emily's posture, clothes, and grades as if parenting were a resume-building exercise. In the McLean mansion, Emily had a bedroom with custom wallpaper, a private math tutor, and anxiety so severe she sometimes pressed her palms into her eyes until Colored lights appeared. With James, she could be quiet without being forgotten. The folder Emily held that night had not been gathered all at once. It began with a printer left warm in Gregory's office and a page stuck halfway beneath a tax binder. Emily had gone in looking for tape for a school project and saw her grandfather's name beside words she did not understand. Durable power of attorney, asset liquidation, medical incapacity. At first, she assumed adults knew what they were doing. But then she heard Tyler laughing on speakerphone saying, "The old man won't fight it if he's still half sedated," and Gregory answering, "By the time he's discharged, the deed will be recorded." Emily's stomach had turned cold. She photographed documents with her phone, printed hospital visitor logs from emails her mother left open, saved a voicemail from Madison complaining that the buyer wanted closing moved up, and hid everything inside a blue school folder labeled Civics Project. She wanted to tell someone, but every adult in her home seemed connected to the lie. So she waited for James to wake up. When Walter Reed allowed a short visit, she stood outside his room looking through a glass panel at the old man breathing through tubes, and for the first time in her life, she understood that truth could be urgent. After the agents finished their first questions, Gregory tried to regain control with the fury of a man unused to being cornered in his own house. "Emily," he said, low and dangerous, "go upstairs." She flinched but did not move. James saw that flinch and felt something inside him sharpen. He had seen recruits flinch before incoming rounds. He had seen interpreters flinch at checkpoints when the wrong militia truck appeared. A child should not flinch from her father's voice at a dinner table. "She stays," James said. Gregory stood. "You don't get to give orders in my home." The silence that followed was absolute. James looked around at the chandelier, the wine, the abstract art, the table long enough to seat 12 people who did not trust each other, and then back at Gregory. "No," he said. "Apparently, I don't even get to keep mine." Marlene Ortiz stepped slightly between them, not aggressively, just enough to remind everyone that this was no longer a family disagreement. Emily walked to James's side with the blue folder hugged against her ribs. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I'm sorry." He looked down at her, and the anger in his face broke into grief. For what? For not telling sooner. James reached out, his hand trembling from weakness and emotion, and touched the top of her head. "You're the only one here who told it all." The investigation did not end that night. It only opened a door the Whitaker family had spent years decorating from the outside and rotting behind. Over the next 10 days, James stayed not in his own home because the locks had been changed and the legal title temporarily clouded, but in a modest extended-stay hotel near Old Town Alexandria. The room smelled of carpet cleaner and stale air conditioning. His suits hung from a metal rack. His medication bottles lined the bathroom sink beside a disposable razor. For a man worth millions on paper, it was an almost absurd exile. But James refused Gregory's offer to work things out privately, and refused Madison's suggestion that the agents had misunderstood a family estate strategy. Each morning, he met with federal investigators, an elder financial abuse attorney, recommended by the VA, and a retired judge who had served with him on a veterans board. They showed him copies of electronic signatures, wire transfers, shell companies, and a closing statement listing the sale price at $2.1 million. Of that amount, $640,000 had already moved through accounts connected to Tyler's business debt. $310,000 had paid off Madison's private loans, and another $225,000 had gone toward renovations on Gregory's McLean property. James listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the conference table, feeling less like a father than a crime scene. Emily began calling him from a prepaid phone she bought with birthday money because Gregory had taken her regular phone after the dinner. The first call came at 11:18 p.m., her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you mad at me?" James sat on the edge of the hotel bed in a white undershirt, heart monitor patch still taped to his chest, and closed his eyes. "No, sweetheart. Dad says I ruined everything." James looked at the dark television screen and saw his own reflection. Older, thinner, less certain. "Your father made choices before you opened that folder." Emily was quiet. Then she asked, "Do you still love him?" The question hit James harder than any accusation. He wanted to say no because no would be easier. He wanted to say that betrayal burned love clean out of a man. But he had folded flags into the hands of parents whose sons had made terrible mistakes and still been mourned. "Yes," he said. Finally, "I love him. But love doesn't mean letting him hurt people." Emily breathed shakily. "Is that what honor is?" James rubbed the bridge of his nose, remembering the porch, the lemonade, the old lessons. Part of it. What's the other part? He looked at the folded American flag pin on the nightstand, the one he had worn home from the hospital, standing beside the person who tells the truth when everyone else wants her punished. The pressure on Emily became worse before it became, better. At St. Catherine's Academy, a private school where tuition cost $38,000 a year and parents discussed college admissions as if discussing military campaigns, whispers followed her through the hallways. Someone's mother had heard that her grandfather had dementia. Someone's father said federal agents had embarrassed the family. One girl asked if Emily was going to testify against her own dad, like on Netflix. Emily stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria and began sitting in the library, between biographies of presidents and old atlases, staring at pages without reading them. Lauren told her to apologize to Gregory, because men under stress say things they don't mean. Gregory told her loyalty mattered more than being right. Madison sent a text saying that families handled problems inside the family. Tyler sent nothing, which somehow frightened Emily more. One afternoon, during a civics class discussion about the Constitution, Emily's teacher asked what checks and balances meant. Emily's throat tightened, and she answered, "It means no one gets unlimited power just because they think they deserve it." The room went quiet. That evening, she had a panic attack in the girls' restroom, locked in a stall, breathing into her sleeve while rain tapped the windows. The school nurse called Lauren, but Emily begged her to call James instead. James arrived in a rideshare because doctors had not yet cleared him to drive. He entered the school lobby slowly, cane clicking. Against polished tile, wearing a gray wool coat over a white shirt buttoned wrong at the collar because he had dressed too quickly. The receptionist recognized his name and stiffened with the discomfort of people who know too much gossip and too little truth. Emily sat in the nurse's office under a thin blanket, cheeks blotched, eyes swollen, trying to look composed and failing. When she saw him, she stood so fast the blanket fell to the floor. "I'm sorry," she said again, because apology had become the language adults demanded from her. James crossed the room, ignoring the ache in his chest, and lowered himself into the chair beside her. "Emily, listen to me." She looked at his hands first, then his face. "There are people who will call you cruel because your honesty cost them comfort. There are people who will call you dramatic because your pain makes them visible. And there are people who will call you disloyal because they confuse family with silence." He paused, fighting his own emotion. "None of those people get to define you." Emily cried then, quietly at first, then with the exhausted relief of a child finally allowed to stop defending herself. James put one arm around her shoulders. He had commanded battalions, briefed Pentagon officials, negotiated with men who lied for a living. But sitting in that nurse's office with a shaking girl against his side, he felt he had reached the real front line of his old age. The legal fight hardened the family into opposing camps. Gregory's attorneys filed a motion claiming James had shown signs of cognitive instability after hospitalization, and that the sale had been executed under a valid family plan discussed months earlier. Madison submitted emails selectively edited to suggest James had once considered downsizing. Tyler argued through counsel that all transfers were loans, not theft. James's attorney, a blunt former JAG officer named Rebecca Hale, spread the filings across a conference table and said, "They're not just defending themselves, they're trying to make you look confused." James stared at the papers. That accusation frightened him more than he wanted to admit. Since the hospital, names occasionally took longer to surface. He misplaced his reading glasses twice. He sometimes woke at 3 a.m., unsure whether he was in Alexandria, Walter Reed, or a barracks room from 1989. His body had betrayed him once. Now his children wanted a court to believe his mind had followed. Rebecca watched his face and said more gently, "Colonel, needing recovery time is not incompetence." James nodded. But later, alone in the hotel bathroom, he gripped the sink and studied himself in the mirror. The man looking back had sagging skin beneath his eyes, grey stubble along his jaw, and fear behind the discipline. "Margaret," he whispered to the empty room. "What did I miss in them?" The answer did not come from Margaret. It came from an unexpected box rescued from a storage facility in Fairfax after investigators traced the moving company. Most of James's furniture had been handled carelessly. One dresser was cracked, framed photographs were wrapped in newspaper, and several boxes had been mislabeled for disposal. But near the back, beneath a stack of winter coats, James found the cedar chest. His hands shook as Rebecca helped him open it. The metals were still there, dull under the storage unit's fluorescent light. Beneath them, tucked inside a plastic sleeve, was one packet of Margaret's letters, not Da. All 184, only 17. James sat on an overturned moving crate and held them like something alive. Emily had come with him that Saturday, wearing her oversized navy sweater and white sneakers, and she watched the old colonel press one envelope to his lips. "Was she nice?" Emily asked softly. James smiled for the first time in days, and grief changed the whole shape of his face. "She was tougher than me." Emily sat beside him on the crate. "Did she ever get mad at you?" "Often." "For what?" James looked at the letter in his hand. For thinking paying bills was the same as being present. Emily did not answer, but she leaned her shoulder lightly against his arm. James understood then that the house mattered. The money mattered. The fraud mattered. But the deeper trial was this: whether he would let betrayal turn him into stone, or let one brave child teach him how to become human again. The federal hearing took place on a gray Thursday morning in Alexandria, inside a courthouse, where the floors shone like old bone and the American flag stood motionless beside the judge's bench. James arrived in a dark suit that hung a little looser than it used to, his cane in one hand, a small wooden metal box in the other, not because he wanted sympathy, but because he needed to remember who he had been before his own children tried to reduce him to a confused old man with a valuable address. Emily sat 2 rows behind him with Rebecca Hale, wearing a simple navy dress and a cardigan. Her hair tied back so tightly it made her face look even younger. Gregory avoided looking at her. Madison kept checking her phone until the bailiff warned her once. Tyler bounced one knee under the table, his confidence leaking out in tiny, restless movements. When the judge asked whether the government was prepared to present the evidence regarding the sale of 1183 Cameron Street, Special Agent Price stood and described the timeline with surgical calm: the hospital admission, the ventilator, record, the notarized electronic signature, the deed transfer, the wire movements, the payments to private debts, the renovation invoice for Gregory's home, and the buyer's hidden connection to Tyler's business partner. Every sentence landed like a nail driven into polished wood. James listened without turning around, but when Price said, "The alleged authorization was executed while Colonel Whitaker was medically unable to consent," the old man closed his eyes. It was one thing to know his children had stolen from him. It was another to hear the United States government explain it aloud, in a room where everyone had to sit quietly and let the truth breathe. Then Emily was called. Her face went white so quickly James thought she might faint, and Gregory's attorney rose at once, questioning whether a 13-year-old under emotional distress could provide reliable testimony. Rebecca objected before James could move, but Emily had already heard the insult beneath the legal phrasing. Her hands trembled as she stepped toward the witness chair, and for a second she looked not like a witness, not like a key figure in a federal case, but like a child, walking into a storm built by adults who should have sheltered her. The clerk asked her to tell the truth, and Emily's voice cracked on the words, "I do." Gregory finally looked at her then, not with love, but with a warning so cold James felt it from across the room. Emily saw it too. Her breathing changed. She gripped the edge of the chair. The judge asked if she needed a moment. Before anyone else could speak, James rose slowly, pain tightening his mouth as he pushed against the cane. "Your Honor," he said, voice rough but steady, "may I stand where my granddaughter can see me?" Gregory's attorney objected, but the judge studied the old colonel, then the frightened girl, and nodded. James walked to the side aisle, stopping where Emily could keep her eyes on him instead of her father. "Look at me, Emily," he said softly. Not at him, You tell the truth, and I'll stand right here." Emily's shoulders shook once, but she nodded. Then she opened the blue folder. The first document was a printed email in which Madison discussed staging the sale as a medical necessity. The second was a hospital log proving James was unconscious when his authorization had supposedly been signed. The third was a screenshot of Tyler texting Gregory, close before Dad wakes up enough to ask questions. The fourth was a voicemail Emily had, recorded on her school tablet. Madison's voice, clear and impatient. "I don't care if he wants the letters. The buyer wants the place empty." At that, James's composure almost broke. He looked down at the metal box in his hands and thought of Margaret's handwriting, her grocery lists, her birthday notes, her wartime letters, treated as clutter by the children she had once rocked to sleep. Gregory suddenly stood, unable to contain himself. "This is what you wanted, Dad," he snapped, ignoring his attorney's hand on his sleeve. "You wanted your own family dragged through court. You were never there for us. You were there for the army. You were there for the flag. You were there for strangers. And now you want to play victim because we made one decision without you." The courtroom froze. James turned toward his son, and for a long moment he did not answer. When he did, his voice was quieter than Gregory's, and that made it more devastating. "I did choose duty too often," he said. "I missed games. I missed dinners. I missed the small days your mother begged me not to miss. I thought providing was proof of love, and I was wrong." Gregory's face flickered, but James continued. "I may have failed you as a father in ways I'll regret until my last breath, but you chose to rob me. That choice is yours, not mine." Emily began crying then, silently at first, then with the helpless sound of a child who had carried adult guilt too long. "I'm sorry," she whispered from the witness chair. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't want Dad to go to jail. I didn't want everybody to hate me." James turned away from Gregory and walked toward her, each step slow, each breath measured, until he stood beside the witness chair. "Emily," he said, and the whole courtroom seemed to lean toward them. "You did not destroy this family." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But I told." James set the metal box on the rail and took both of her small hands in his. "No, sweetheart. You stopped a lie from being called family." For the first time since the dinner in McLean, Emily let herself collapse forward, and James wrapped his arms around her in front of the judge, the agents, the attorneys, and the children who had betrayed him. His cane fell against the wooden bench with a hollow sound, but he did not reach for it. He held his granddaughter with both arms. In that embrace, James finally stopped trying to save the image of the Whitaker family and chose to save the one person in it, who still believed honor meant something. Enjoying this story? Then hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get back to the video. The judge called for a recess, but no one moved immediately. Gregory sat down as if his bones had lost structure. Madison covered her mouth, not in grief for her father, but in terror at the consequences now becoming real. Tyler stared at the table, his eyes wet, maybe from shame, maybe from fear, maybe from the first honest understanding that money taken from an old man's house could cost more than money. In the hallway outside, beneath fluorescent lights and framed portraits of judges long gone, Marlene Ortiz told James that emergency protective measures would remain in place, the disputed funds would stay frozen, and the government would support reversal of the sale pending final findings. James nodded, but his attention stayed on Emily, who stood beside a vending machine with Rebecca's coat around her shoulders, looking emptied. Out. He walked to her, slower now, and she looked up, as if expecting another consequence. Instead, James handed her the small American flag keychain he had recovered from the storage box, the same one she had kept for years until Gregory took her belongings after the dinner. "You gave this back to me when I forgot what courage looked like," he said. Emily closed her fingers around it. "What happens now?" she asked. James looked through the courthouse windows at the wet street, the passing cars, the flag snapping above the entrance in the cold wind. He did not pretend the road ahead would be easy. "Now," he said, "we rebuild what can be rebuilt. We tell the truth about what can't, and you never stand alone again." 6 weeks after the hearing, The deed to 1183 Cameron Street was restored to Colonel James Whitaker by order of the court, and the old red brick house in Alexandria breathed again under a pale winter sun. The real estate company that had purchased it withdrew after federally. Pressure exposed its connection to Tyler's business partner, and the frozen funds were traced with enough clarity that no lawyer at Gregory's polished firm could call it a misunderstanding anymore. Gregory entered a negotiated plea on financial exploitation and wire fraud-related charges. Tyler faced penalties tied to the Shell transfers, and Madison's real estate license was suspended pending a state ethics review. James did not celebrate when Rebecca Hale called him with the news. He sat at the kitchen table in the house he had almost lost, with Margaret's surviving letters laid carefully in front of him and a cup of black coffee growing cold beside his hand. The American flag outside the porch moved softly in the wind, not like a decoration, but like a witness. Emily stood in the doorway wearing her navy sweater, watching him with the cautious hope of someone who had learned that good news could still hurt. "Are you happy?" she asked. James looked around at the scratched oak floor, the empty nail marks where family photos had been taken down, the faint rectangle on the wall where Margaret's portrait used to hang, and then at the granddaughter who had risked everything to save a truth most adults wanted buried. "No," he said honestly. Then he reached for her hand. "But I'm grateful, and sometimes gratitude is where healing starts." By early spring, Emily was living with James under a temporary guardianship arrangement supported by her counselor, her school advocate, and the court-appointed family specialist who had interviewed her twice and concluded what James already knew. The mansion in McLean had offered comfort without safety, while the old house in Alexandria offered rules, warmth, and someone who listened. Her new bedroom had pale blue walls, a wooden desk from a veteran's charity shop, and a shelf where she placed the little American flag keychain beside a framed photo of Margaret smiling in the backyard. James learned things late but earnestly. He learned that Emily hated being asked too many questions right after school, but loved talking while helping make pancakes on Saturday mornings. He learned that panic did not always look like crying. Sometimes it looked like silence, nail-biting, or rereading the same homework page 5 times. Emily learned things too. She learned that old soldiers could burn toast, forget grocery lists, cry quietly during Memorial Day broadcasts, and still be brave. Their life was not cinematic every day. It was pharmacy runs, therapy appointments, civics homework, VA follow-ups, laundry, awkward calls with Lauren, and long walks past the Potomac when James's doctor insisted he rebuild his strength. But in those ordinary routines, a new kind of family took shape, one not built on inheritance, obligation, or appearances, but on presence. That summer, James used $1.5 million of recovered assets and personal investments to create the Whitaker Homefront Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting elderly veterans from family fraud, property theft, and financial abuse during hospitalizations. The opening event was held in a modest community hall near Washington, D.C., not a luxury ballroom, because James wanted folding chairs, coffee in paper cups, and people who actually needed help. Retired Marines, Army widows, Navy nurses, VA social workers, legal aid attorneys, and young cadets filled the room. On the wall behind the podium hung a simple banner, "Protect those who protected us." James walked to the microphone slower than he once would have, his cane tapping against the floor, Emily beside him carrying a folder of handwritten letters from veterans' families. He did not speak like a victim. He spoke like a man who had finally understood that patriotism was more than saluting flags or praising service from a safe distance. "A nation does not honor its veterans only with parades," he said, his voice steady. "It honors them by making sure no one steals their homes while they are lying in a hospital bed." The applause rose slowly at first, then filled the hall. Emily looked up at him, and James placed one hand gently on her shoulder. "And sometimes," he added, "the person who saves a soldier is not another soldier. Sometimes it is a child with a shaking voice who refuses to let a lie win." 3 years later, Emily Whitaker stood on that same stage at 16, taller now, calmer now, with her hair loose over a navy blazer and the old flag keychain clipped to her speech folder. James sat in the front row, thinner, older, but peaceful, his hands folded over the top of his cane. The foundation had helped 412 veterans and surviving spouses recover property, freeze suspicious transfers, or find legal protection before family greed became irreversible. Emily told the audience that she once thought courage meant being fearless, but her grandfather had taught her the truth. Courage was doing the right thing while your whole body begged you to stay silent. When she finished, James stood with effort, and the room stood with him. Not because he was rich, not because he had medals, not because he had won a court case, but because he had turned betrayal into protection for others. Later, on the porch of the Alexandria house, Emily rested her head on his shoulder, while the evening flag moved gently above them. James looked at the warm windows, the repaired walls, the life returning to rooms that greed had nearly emptied, and finally understood Margaret's last lesson. Legacy was not what people inherited from you. It was what they became because you loved them well. Have you ever done an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Drop a little heart if you believe love is stronger than any fortune. Subscribe for more stories about second chances. Comment, "Love has no price tag," if you believe in human kindness too.